you were to drive through Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois, you might see fields and fields of corn farms. You might also see large clouds of steam from ethanol plants. These 4 states produce the most corn in the United States, and also the most ethanol. Ethanol, which in the United States is made primarily from corn, is a biofuel. A fuel made from recently living organisms or their byproducts. Ethanol is in growing demand as a gasoline additive to help meet energy needs. Because of this, corn is also in high demand. How does the rising demand for corn affect consumers? Think about all the foods you eat that are made from corn, such as corn flakes, corn muffins, and tortillas. Soda, candy, and hundreds of other processed foods contain high fructose corn syrup. And then there is popcorn. The corn used for popcorn is different from that used in ethanol. And popcorn producers have to pay farmers more to plant it. Higher prices for corn means increased prices for these foods at the grocery store. Ranchers also pay more for corn, which they use to feed cattle, pigs, and chicken. The higher cost of feeding livestock is then passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for beef, pork, and chicken. Of course, agricultural markets can be unstable with swings in supply and demand that lead to rising and falling prices. If ethanol does not prove to be as efficient a fuel as people hope, the demand for corn may slow. If researchers discover a more efficient or cheaper source of ethanol, the demand for corn may slow, impacting corn prices. On the other hand, a drought can significantly reduce corn supply, resulting in much higher prices that can affect ethanol production. There will always be factors affecting the prices of the products you buy. In this lesson, you will learn what these factors are. You will see how supply and demand interact to set prices, and how changes in supply and demand can cause prices to change. This lesson will help you understand what the price is right really means. If you have ever been to a farmer's market or a flea market, you've probably seen people haggling over a price. You also surely noticed that it took an agreement between a buyer and a seller before a deal was made. If the buyer did not like the price, then they might have walked away. If the seller had not wanted to accept the buyer's offer, no sale was made. You may think of such encounters as simple purchases, but to an economist, they represent the coming together of demand and supply. In a market where consumers and producers are completely free to buy and sell goods and services, demand and supply work together to determine prices. This is true whether the market is a local farmer's market or a global market. The very interaction of demand and supply drives prices to a point called market equilibrium. At the point of equilibrium, The quantity of a good or service that consumers are willing and able to buy equals the quantity that producers are willing and able to sell. The quantity demanded, in other words, equals the quantity supplied. Market equilibrium can be compared to the point reached by a balance scale when each side holds an object for equal mass. The beam of the scale is level. It does not tip up or down. The opposite forces balance each other to create stability. Likewise, when a market is in equilibrium, demand and supply are balanced. Both consumers and producers are satisfied. Neither side has any reason to tip the scale. Consider watermelons being sold at a weekly farmer's market. Suppose that when the season opens, local farmers charge $6.50 per seedless watermelon, hoping to sell 350 melons at this price. You and other consumers try to bargain the price down, but the farmers will not budge. Most customers just walk away, and the farmers sell only 50 melons. The next week, the farmers bring 300 new melons and reduce the price to $6 a melon. The price is still too high for you and many others. The farmers sell 100 melons and have 200 left over. 2 weeks later, the farmers bring 200 fresh melons to the market and reduce the price to $5. On this day, all of the 200 melons are sold, and everyone who wanted to buy a melon was able to purchase one. The farmers decided to keep the price at $5 and bring 200 melons to market each week. At this price, the quantity of melons demanded by buyers equals the quantity supplied by farmers. The melon market at this farmer's market has reached equilibrium. What if the farmers were to produce the price even more? Let's assume they wanted to quickly sell 100 melons. They reduced the price to $4 a melon. At this price, customers are eager to buy. They demand 300 melons, 200 more than farmers have to sell. Many people do not get a watermelon because the farmers are sold out. The demand and supply schedule in Figure 6.1 shows the quantity of melons demanded and supplied at each price in the market. When these data are plotted on a graph, the resulting demand and supply curves intersect. The point of intersection is the point at which the market is in equilibrium. At the equilibrium point, the quantity of melons demanded equals the quantity of melons supplied. The price marked by the equilibrium point on a supply and demand graph is known as the equilibrium price. At this price, supply and demand are in balance. The price is also known as the market clearing price because at this price the market will be cleared of all surpluses and shortages. At the farmer's market, for example, no customer who wants a melon will go home empty-handed when melons are sold at the equilibrium price of $5, nor will any farmer go home with leftover melons. The quantity marked by the equilibrium point on the same graph is called the equilibrium quantity. At this quantity, the amount of a good or service supplied by producers balances the quantity demanded by consumers. In this example, both the graph and the schedule show the equilibrium quantity is 200 melons. When supply matches demand, consumers and producers both come away satisfied. True consumers would always be happy to pay less, and producers would always be happy to charge more. But in a competitive market, prices are negotiated, not dictated by one side or the other. A farmer's market is a good place to witness the communication that passes between consumers and producers. If a farmer sets prices for a product, such as a watermelon, too high for most shoppers, some consumers will try to drive the price down with hard bargaining. Others will look the goods over in silence and then walk away. On the other hand, if a farmer sets prices too low, early bird bargain hunters will flock to the stall, sweeping up every melon in sight. The farmer who knows how to read these signals will respond by adjusting the price of melons up or down to match the current demand. Such interaction between consumers and producers will eventually establish the equilibrium price for watermelons in the market. The equilibrium price, the price at which shoppers agree to buy all the melons the farmer agrees to sell, is the right price for both parties. What goes on in a farmer's market is a simplified version of the communication that takes place between all producers and all consumers. In a larger market, this kind of negotiation happens more slowly and perhaps less personally than in a local farmer's market, but the process is the same. Consumers and producers send each other numerous trial and error messages. Consider, for example, a new product on the toy market, a helicopter that can be controlled by an app. If the producer of this toy helicopter were to price it at $1 or $100, and few consumers were to purchase it, consumers would be sending a message to the producer to reduce the price or be left with helicopters on the shelf. On the other hand, if consumers were to form lines out the door to purchase the toy at that price, they would be sending a message to producers that the price may be too low. The interaction between consumers and producers automatically pushes the market price of a good or service toward the equilibrium price. Market price is the price a willing consumer pays to a willing producer for the sake of a good or service. The process by which markets move to equilibrium is so predictable that economists sometimes refer to markets as being governed by the law of supply and demand. This is a shorthand way of saying that in a competitive free market, the law of supply and the law of demand will jointly push the price of a good or service to a level where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal. Economist Alfred Marshall, who helped develop modern theories of supply and demand, famously compared supply and demand to the blades of a pair of scissors. It will be impossible to determine, he wrote, whether it is the top blade or the bottom blade that cuts through a piece of paper. The two blades operate in unison. In the same way, the laws of supply and demand operate together to arrive at equilibrium. Economists think of the equilibrium price as the right price because it is the price that producers and consumers agree on. Sometimes, however, producers set a market price that is above or below the equilibrium price. Economists refer to this state of affairs as disequilibrium. When disequilibrium occurs in a market, the quantity demanded is no longer equal to the quantity supplied. Disequilibrium results in either an economic shortage or a surplus. Have you ever stood in a long line waiting for the latest video game release? Or have you gone to the theater to see a blockbuster movie only to find the tickets sold out when you get to the counter? Economists call situations like these, in which the quantity demanded at a specific price exceeds the quantity supplied, excess demand. Consumers experience excess demand as a shortage. A shortage occurs when there are too many consumers chasing too few goods. To economists, excess demand is a sign that the price of a good or service is set too low. For example, suppose the owners of a juice bar concoct a new smoothie called Blueberry Blast. They priced it at $1.55. Soon, the line of customers waiting to buy the $1.55 smoothie is out the door every day. With these long lines, the owners realize that they have a problem: excess demand. The quantity demanded greatly exceeds the quantity they are willing and able to supply at that price. They may not be able to afford additional staff to accommodate all the customers or to pay for all the smoothie supplies. The low price results in reduced profits for the owners. The excess demand graph in Figure 6.2 illustrates this problem. At $1.50 per smoothie, customers will buy 5,000 drinks per month. The juice bar owner supply only 1,000 smoothies at this price. The result is a shortage for the many customers who want smoothies and are not able to buy them. The juice bar owners could solve their excess demand problem by increasing the price of their smoothies until they have fewer long lines throughout the day. Doing this would bring them closer to the equilibrium price, at which the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Have you ever looked through a clearance rack for bargains on clothes? Or have you looked for laptops or cell phones on a website that sells overstocked electronic goods? These markdown products have something in common. They were all initially offered for sale at prices above what consumers were willing to pay. The result was excess supply, a situation in which the quantity supplied at a specific price exceeds the quantity demanded. Producers experience excess supply as a surplus. A surplus occurs when there are too few consumers willing to pay what producers are asking for their goods. Suppose that the juice bar owners, in an attempt to solve their excess demand problem, raise the price of a Blueberry Blast to $3.50 per drink. Business slows, and they soon discover that they are not selling enough drinks. The quantity demanded by customers is much less than the quantity the juice bar owners want to supply at this price. The excess supply results in a surplus of blueberry smoothie ingredients. Boxes of fresh blueberries go bad in the refrigerator, and blenders stay idle on the counter. The excess supply graph in Figure 6.2 does show that at $3.50 per smoothie, the juice bar owners are willing and able to produce 5,000 drinks, but customers only buy 1,000 smoothies, resulting in a surplus. If the owners choose to reduce the price, more customers would be willing and able to buy. The price would then move toward the equilibrium price, at which quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. What price should the juice bar owners set for their Blueberry Blast? Figure 6.2 shows that the right price is $2.50. At that price, the quantity of smoothies demanded, 3,000, equals the quantity supplied. In a free market, surpluses and shortages are usually temporary. When a market is in disequilibrium, the actions of many producers and consumers serve to move the market price toward equilibrium. How long it takes to restore the equilibrium price varies from market to market. Owners of a local juice bar might be able to change their blueberry smoothie prices every month until the price is right. In contrast, a national fast food chain might take much longer to find the right price for every item on its menu. Menus, signs, and advertising would need to be changed for all the many restaurant items. Whether prices change quickly or slowly, however, once they move toward equilibrium, shortages and surpluses start to disappear. In our hypothetical markets for watermelons and smoothies, equilibrium was restored by adjusting prices, thereby changing the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied in those markets. On a graph, a change in quantity demanded is shown as a movement from one point to another along the demand curve. Similarly, a change in quantity supplied is shown as a movement from one point to another along the supply curve. When quantity demanded and quantity supplied move at the same point, the intersection of the curves, equilibrium, is reached. Suppose, though, that instead of changes in quantity demanded and quantity supplied, a market experiences a change in demand or supply. Such a change would shift the entire demand or supply curve to a new position on the graph. This shift, in turn, would have an effect on market equilibrium. Anything that brings about a shift in the demand curve is a demand shifter. Loss of income, a spike in the population, a new trend. Any of these events could shift demand by altering consumer spending patterns. Likewise, anything that shifts the supply curve is a supply shifter. Important supply shifters include changes in the number of producers and changes in the cost of inputs. When an event causes the demand or supply curve to shift, the point of equilibrium changes. To analyze such a change, economists ask these three questions. Does the event affect demand, supply, or both? Does the event shift the demand or supply curve to the right or to the left? What are the new equilibrium price and quantity? And how have they changed as a result of the event? One of the most powerful factors that can influence market demand is changing consumer tastes. Consider, for instance, what might happen if new medical research were to identify blueberries as a powerful brain food. How would this event affect the blueberry smoothie market? Think back to the economist's three questions. The new research affects the demand for blueberry smoothies. After reading the published report, consumers buy more foods made with blueberries because they think eating blueberries will make them smarter. The research has little or no immediate impact on the supply of such products. The event shifts the demand curve to the right. In Figure 6.3a, the demand for blueberry smoothies before the research was reported is represented by the initial demand curve, labeled D. The demand after the research report's release is shown by the new curve, labeled D. The D curve is to the right of the D curve, or the D1 curve, or the day 2 curve, is to the right of the day 1 curve. The shift to the right indicates an increase in demand. Due to increased demand, the new equilibrium price found at the intersection of the new demand curve and the supply curve is $3. The new equilibrium quantity is 4,000 smoothies. This is an increase over the initial equilibrium price of $2.50, an equilibrium quantity of 3,000 smoothies. Notice that if the juice bar owner had kept the price of smoothies at $2.50 after demand had increased, a shortage would have occurred. At $2.50, consumers would have demanded 5,000 smoothies, but the producers would have been willing and able to supply only 3,000. Therefore, by raising the price to $3, the producers found the right price. The equilibrium price at which the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Among the many variables that can shift market supply are extreme weather conditions, such as hurricanes, floods, and freezing temperatures. Consider having a prolonged summer drought in major blueberry producing states might affect the market for blueberry smoothies. Suppose the blueberry harvest is half of the average amount. What impact would this have on the market? The drought and subsequent bad harvest affects supply by driving up the cost of blueberries, one of the raw materials used in the production of blueberry smoothies, also known as the main ingredient of blueberry smoothies. As a result of higher input costs, the juice bar owners supply fewer smoothies at every price. The drought has no impact on demand because the higher cost of blueberries does not change the number of smoothies people want to buy. Because the number of smoothies produced has decreased at every price, the supply curve moves to the left. This is shown on the graph in figure 6.3b. The new supply curve labeled S2 is to the left of the initial supply curve labeled S1. The new equilibrium price for blueberry smoothies is $3. At this price, the new equilibrium quantity is 2,000 smoothies. Before the drought, the equilibrium price was $2.50, and the equilibrium quantity was 3,000 smoothies. The drought has caused the equilibrium price to increase and the equilibrium quantity to decrease. If producers had not raised the price of smoothies, a shortage would have occurred. At $2.50, there would have been demand for 3,000 smoothies, but a supply of only 1,000. In other words, the price was no longer right at $2.50. At $3, the quantity of smoothies demanded and supplied became equal. Finally, consider a scenario in which a combination of events causes change to the demand and supply of blueberry smoothies at the same time. The first event is the publication of a best-selling book that calls the blueberry a miracle fruit that promotes good health. The second event is the announcement by a supermarket chain that it is opening juice bars in most of its local stores. To determine the impact of these two events on the smoothie market, think again of the three questions. The events are likely to affect both supply and demand. The book, like the research report in the earlier scenario, motivates consumers to buy more blueberry smoothies, thus increasing the quantity demanded at all prices. The juice bars opening the supermarkets cause an increase in the number of producers, thus increasing the quantity of smoothies supplied at all prices. Because these events cause an increase in both quantity demanded and quantity supplied at all prices, both the demand curve and the supply curve shift to the right. This is shown on the graph in figure 6.3c. The new demand and supply curve, labeled D3 and S3, are to the right of the initial demand, and supply curves labeled S1 and D2. This indicates an increase in both demand and supply. While both demand and supply have increased, demand for smoothies has increased even more than supply has. The graph in figure 6.3c shows an increase of the equilibrium price from $2.50 to $3, and an increase of the equilibrium quantity from 3,000 to 6,000 smoothies. If the juice bar owners had not raised the price by 50 cents, a shortage of 2,000 smoothies would have occurred. In the real world, demand and supply are continually shifting in response to events. The impact of such shifts is not always immediately clear. It usually takes time for economists to discern the precise effects of demand and supply shifters on markets. When a product's demand and supply both increase, economists are safe in predicting that the equilibrium quantity of the product will increase, but economists cannot tell with any certainty how the equilibrium price will change. In our simplified model of a market, the equilibrium price increased. In a real market, the equilibrium price could increase, decrease, or stay the same. Think about the last time you were shopping. What were you shopping for? Clothes, new shoes, birthday gift for a friend? Whatever it was, you probably found a lot to choose from. Athletic shoes, for example, come in dozens of styles and brand names. In the end, how did you decide what to buy? If you are like most consumers, price was an important component of your decision, perhaps even the deciding factor. As consumers, most of us think of prices simply as indicators of what we have to pay to get what we want. Economists see prices differently. Looking at prices from the point of view of an economist, we find that they perform a number of important roles in a modern mixed economy. A primary role of price is to convey information. Both consumers and producers use this information to help make decisions. It may be an overstatement to call prices a language, but prices do send a signal. The high price of Manhattan's real estate, for example, signals that this particular good is in short supply. The low price of rubber flip-flops sends the opposite signal. As economist Thomas Sowell put it, Prices are like messengers conveying news. To consumers, price signals the opportunity cost of a purchase. The opportunity cost of buying any product, remember, is the next best use for the money you spend. You may not think twice about buying something inexpensive, like a pack of shoelaces, because you give up little opportunity with the dollar you spend. On the other hand, before buying a pricey item like a flat-screen television, you would probably shop around, research brands, and seek out the lowest price. When the opportunity cost of buying is high, people tend to think carefully before parting with their money. Prices convey information to producers as well. Prices tell producers what consumers want. Automobile manufacturers, for example, pay attention to which models and features sell at high prices and which need to be marked down in order to attract buyers. Prices are a way for automakers to gauge consumer preferences. Without monitoring prices, car makers wouldn't know which models to produce more of and which to cut back on. Producers also use prices to appeal to the consumers they hope will buy their products. A firm that produces backpacks, for example, might offer a stylish model at a low price, targeted to preteens who want one for school. The same firm might produce heavy-duty backpacks for serious adult hikers and offer them at higher prices. In each case, price sends a message about products and their intended markets. Consumers, for their part, are used to interpreting these messages. They know that producers are trying to appeal to a wide range of tastes and budgets. Consumers use price to sort through the resulting variety of goods in the marketplace. Faced with a vast selection of running shoes ranging in price from around $19 to over $200, for example, most consumers will narrow their searches to a limited price range. The choice of how much to spend may in part be based on what a person can afford, but it also reflects the consumer's expectation of what will be available at that price. As the incentives matter principle reminds us, people respond to incentives. In a market-based economy, prices function as an incentive because they represent potential for profit. Rising prices in a market motivate existing firms to produce more, and they encourage new firms to enter the market. Falling prices, in turn, serve as incentives for firms to cut back on production or even to leave a market to look for better opportunities elsewhere. When home prices increase, for example, the change signals construction firms, architects, builders, and tradespeople that there are profit to be made in the housing market. Existing firms build more houses and new firms get into the act. When prices in the same housing market decrease, the reverse happens. Construction firms build fewer houses. Architects, builders, and tradespeople look for other markets for their talents, such as house renovations and commercial construction. Just as changing prices motivate producers, prices in the form of wages and salaries motivate workers. The opportunity to earn a higher price can inspire people to enter the workforce or seek higher paying jobs. On the other hand, low wages can act as disincentives for people to seek work. Prices allow markets to adjust quickly when major events such as wars and natural disasters interfere with the production and movement of goods, wreaking havoc on society. Figure 6.4 shows what happens to gas prices in late summer of 2005, when the U.S. Gulf Coast was slammed by two of the most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. The first, Hurricane Katrina, shut down most crude oil production in the Gulf of Mexico and damaged oil refineries from Texas to Florida. Immediately afterward, a government official described the uncertainty facing the oil industry. They don't know how many platforms are down, how many refineries are down, and how long it'll take to get the power back on. It depends on how much damage, particularly hidden damage. Some of the undersea pipeline damage can be hard to detect. Michael Burdett, USHJ, August 29, 2005. Four weeks later, just as the industry was starting to recover, Hurricane Rita struck, causing additional disruptions to the oil supply. The two hurricanes brought a halt to almost 30% of the U.S. oil refinery capacity. For the next few weeks, gas prices fluctuated, sometimes wildly, as oil companies struggled to bring the quantity of gas demanded in line with what refiners were able to supply. One newspaper reported, confused drivers in Georgia saw prices that had climbed as high as $5 a gallon suddenly dropped back to $3 in the span of 24 hours. Fluctuating prices frustrated consumers, but they allowed the markets to adjust to the disruption in supply caused by the hurricanes. By early November 2005, the industry had largely recovered, with only 5% of oil refining capacity still disabled. The retail price of gasoline that month averaged $2.30 per gallon. A month later, the average price had dropped to $2.23 per gallon, lower than it had been before the Hurricane Katrina occurred. This new low equilibrium price reflected the fact that in addition to the increase in supply as U.S. facilities went back online, refiners throughout the world had rushed fuel to the United States in the months after the hurricanes. As the supply of gasoline increased, prices at the pump went down. By throwing the gasoline market into disequilibrium, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita illustrated the key role that prices play in correcting both shortages and surpluses. Prices give markets the flexibility they need to reach equilibrium even under changing conditions. Perhaps the most important role of price in a market-based economy is to guide resources to their most efficient uses. Consider, for example, the market of dairy products, such as yogurt, ice cream, and cheese. The firms whose dairy products are in greatest demand will buy the most milk in order to make products to meet that demand. Guided by prices that communicate what consumers want, dairy producers automatically allocate milk, a scarce resource used to make many different products to its most valuable use. Or consider the earlier example of car manufacturers who use prices to decide which models to produce and in what quantities. These production decisions are at bottom decisions about how best to use limited resources, as Thomas well explained. Without really knowing why consumers like one set of features rather than another, producers automatically produce more of what earns a profit and less of what is losing money. That amounts to producing what the consumers want and stopping the production of what they don't want. Although the producers are only looking out for themselves and their company's bottom line, nevertheless, from the standpoint of the economy as a whole, the society is using its scarce resources more efficiently because decisions are guided by prices. Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics, 2007. On the whole, when prices are allowed to freely rise and fall to the equilibrium levels, they do an effective job of allocating scarce resources to their best uses. On occasion, however, governments intervene in the market in an attempt to influence prices. They do this by placing limits on how high or low certain prices may be. These limits are called price controls. The temptation to impose price controls is, as the economist Henry Hazlitt reminds us, nothing new. The record of price controls goes as far back as human history. They were imposed by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. They were decreed by Hammurabi, king of Babylon, in the 18th century BC. They were tried in ancient Athens. Henry Hazlitt, The Wisdom of Henry Hazlitt, 1993. In modern economies, governments usually impose price controls when they are persuaded that supply and demand will result in prices that are unfairly high for consumers or unfairly low for producers. For example, in the 1970s, the U.S. government imposed price controls on gasoline in response to reduced shipments of foreign oil due to crises in the Middle East. This action was taken to protect consumers from price savings. The government has also imposed price controls during wars in attempts to ensure that goods are distributed fairly during periods of shortage. Governments can control prices in two ways, by setting price floors or price ceilings. Both methods affect supply and demand. When a government wants to keep prices from going too low, it sets a price floor. A price floor is a minimum price consumers are required to pay for a good or service. A price at or above a price floor is legal, while a price below a price floor is illegal. Price floors are meant to push prices up, ensuring that producers receive a benefit for providing a good or service. Pressure to impose price floors usually arises when producers feel the market isn't providing them with adequate income. Suppose, for example, that the equilibrium price of wheat were to fall so low that wheat farmers are struggling to survive. The government could intervene to establish a price floor for wheat. The minimum wage is another type of price floor. The minimum wage is a government-imposed legal floor on the hourly wage rate, which is the price the market pays for labor. The rationale for the minimum wage is that in markets where workers outnumber jobs, supply and demand would drive the equilibrium wage so low that many workers would be earning too little to live decently. While price floors may benefit some people, the larger effect of a price floor is excess supply. To see why, consider the impact of an increase in minimum wage on both workers and employers. As the minimum wage rises, more people apply for minimum wage jobs. The result is an increase in the supply of job seekers. At the same time, employers reduce the number of minimum wage workers they hire in an effort to keep their wage costs from rising. The result is a decrease in demand for workers. Figure 6.5a does illustrate the effect of this combined increase in supply and decrease in demand. For example, at the equilibrium wage rate of $5 per hour, the quantity of workers demanded, 3 million, equals the quantity supplied. At the minimum wage of $6 per hour, however, 4 million workers are supplied, that is, willing and able to work, but only 2 million workers are demanded, that is, hired. This leaves a surplus of 2 million unemployed people. A price floor above the equilibrium price of wheat would have the same effect. Farmers would produce more wheat to sell, but buyers would buy less, resulting in a surplus of wheat. When a government wants to keep prices from going too high, it sets a price ceiling, which is a maximum price consumers may be required to pay for a good or service. A price at or below a price ceiling is legal. A price above the ceiling is not legal. Governments impose price ceilings to enable consumers to buy essential goods or services they wouldn't be able to afford at the equilibrium price. Price ceilings are usually established in response to a crisis such as war, natural disaster, or widespread crop failure. Such supply-shifting events can lead to price increases that may cause a financial burden for a great many people while enriching a select few. The best known form of price ceilings in the United States today is rent control. Rent control regulations make it illegal to charge more than a specified monthly amount for rental housing. In New York City, rent control was introduced during World War II to protect poor families, and over time, these regulations have been eased. By 2014, only 27,000 apartments in New York City were rent controlled. compared to 2 million apartments during the 1950s. Figure 6.5b illustrates the effect of rent control on the rental housing market in a typical city. Imposing a rent ceiling that is below the equilibrium rent leads to excess demand. The artificially low rents attract young people eager to leave home and live independently, or retirees hoping to reduce their expenses. In short, anyone who likes a bargain into the rental market. At the same time, the supply of apartments in the market decreases as landlords who are unwilling to rent at such low prices seek other ways to use their properties. Some, for example, might decide to convert their apartments to condominiums to sell. Moreover, fewer potential landlords enter the rental market because of the difficulty of making a profit under rent control laws. The result is excess demand and a shortage of apartments. Price controls leads to surpluses and shortages because they prevent markets from reaching a market clearing price. The excess supply and demand that arise must be addressed outside the market. This happens in various ways. In the case of an agricultural surplus that results from price floors, the government may limit supply by restricting how much farmers are allowed to grow. Or the government may buy the crop surplus at the price floor to store for later use or to give to a developing country as foreign aid. Such aid often has the effect of undercutting farmers in countries that cannot compete with cheap American surplus grain. When shortages occur, the government may impose rationing, which is the controlled distribution of a limited supply of a good or service. For example, during the 1979 oil crisis, price ceilings on gasoline contributed to a severe gas shortage. So the government instituted a rationing system based on license plate numbers to cope with the shortage. During World War II, the government rationed tires, gasoline, sugar, and other goods that were in short supply because they were being used for the war effort. Rationing can be a costly means of allocating scarce goods. A giant bureaucracy, or the Office of Price Administration, or OPA, had to be set up during World War II to enforce the rationing regulations. Thousands of rationing boards were created, operated by 60,000 employees and 200,000 volunteers. Shortages can also give rise to black markets. A black market is an illegal market in which goods are traded at prices or in quantities higher than those set by law. There was a thriving black market during World War II for meat, sugar, and gasoline, among other products. Some people bought and sold meat through bootleg suppliers. People also made counterfeit ration coupons. In 1 month alone in 1944, the OPA counted 3 million counterfeit coupons. At this point, you might be wondering why price controls can be so harmful to markets. The government doesn't just get rid of them. The answer to this question has more to do with politics than economics. The political pressure on elected officials to intervene in the market when prices rise and fall rapidly can be intense. And although price controls are inefficient, Many people believe that they are further the goals of economic equity in such situations. Moreover, some people, farmers, and people who live in rental-controlled apartments, workers who earn the minimum wage, clearly benefit from price controls. Labor unions also support minimum wage laws because such laws are believed to push all wages upward. The combined voices and voters of those who support price controls are enough to make most politicians reluctant to repeal them. Most economists, as you would expect, take a dim view of price controls. When the government tries to set prices, economists warn that it is likely in order to set them too high or too low, which inevitably results in shortages or surpluses. Markets economics claim from the economists, when left alone, will naturally gravitate to the right price. This takes us back to the question we started with. How do we know when the price is right? The simple answer is that the price is right when the market reaches equilibrium. The process of reaching equilibrium, however, is anything but simple. It involves the individual decisions of countless producers and millions of consumers, just like you. Later on, you will learn more about how markets are organized and what happens when they work less perfectly than the model of supply and demand suggests that they should. In a free market, demand and supply automatically move prices to equilibrium, the point at which quantity demands equals quantity supplied. Demand and supply interact to drive prices for goods and services to the equilibrium level. On a graph, this equilibrium point is found at the intersection of the demand and supply curves. The equilibrium price, otherwise known as the market's clearing price, may be thought of as the right price. Disequilibrium occurs when prices are set above or below the equilibrium price. When prices are too low, excess demand leads to shortage. When prices are too high, excess supply leads to surpluses. Many kinds of events can cause demand and supply curves to shift to the right or left. Markets adjust to these differing conditions by seeking a new equilibrium point. Prices convey information to consumers and producers as to what to buy and produce. Prices motivate workers and firms to enter markets, and they help markets respond to changing conditions. They guide resources to their most efficient uses. Governments sometimes implement price controls when prices are considered unfairly high for consumers or unfairly low for producers. Price floors, such as minimum wage laws, prevent prices from going too low, but lead to excess supply. Price ceilings, such as rent control laws, prevent prices from going too high, but they lead to shortages.